Richard Wilson sat in his 12-year-old Ford pickup, trying to muster up his courage. Courage, what a strange word to use for the action Rick was thinking about. When did life become so desperately unbearable that this seemed like the only option? Rick grew up in a nice home with 2 younger siblings and 2 wonderful parents. He was an excellent student and an all-around athlete, popular throughout the high school. He only experienced 2 injuries in his youth. The first was when his high school girlfriend, the girl he thought he would marry someday, dumped him a month before his prom. Carrie told him the old cliché, "I think it's important for us to date other people to make sure we really love each other." Carrie dared to come to the dance with her new boyfriend who was in college. Much of the next summer and the support of his family helped him get over the sight of the love of his life, with her arms around the college student's neck as they twirled and kissed on the dance floor. A year later, Rick was playing for his high school baseball team when a ball hit him in the right ear. The bone around the ear was crushed. He was now deaf in that ear. And to make matters worse, his recovery time prevented college scouts from seeing him play. The scholarships Rick was counting on to pay for college never materialized. Without a scholarship, Rick enrolled in a state college and was just starting his 3rd year when the Twin Towers were destroyed. On September 14, Rick walked into the local military registration and enlistment office with the full intention of enlisting. It never occurred to him that he might be unfit. He was 6 feet tall, weighing 190 pounds, a picture of manhood. He could lift 260 pounds and run a quarter mile in 58 seconds. The recruiter shook his hand and was kind enough to say, "Thanks son, we'd love to have you on the team," before turning him down due to deafness in his right ear. Rick didn't tell anyone about the refusal. There was no logical reason for the secrecy. He certainly had no reason to be ashamed of his physical inferiority. He simply could never overcome the feeling of inferiority and carried it deep in his soul for many years. Rick graduated from college with a degree in finance and began working at the local branch of a growing bank, Washington Mutual. It was 2003 and the mortgage market was booming. It was not unusual for Rick to close a dozen mortgages every week, in addition to numerous second mortgages and home equity loans. The economy was booming and Rick was feeling good because he was helping people buy their dream home or use the equity in their homes to buy things, boats, new cars, swimming pools, that the average blue-collar worker could never have dreamed of before this economic boom. A year after graduation, Rick met Stacy Wallace. He was playing outfield and was the 4th bat in an adult baseball league when he saw a pretty brunette in his skimpy blouse and not-so-skimpy summer shorts in the stands with the wife of one of his teammates. After the game, Jeff and Jenny introduced Rick to Stacy and asked if he would like to join them at the local pub for a pint. Rick and Stacy sat at a table with drinks, waiting, while Jeff and Jenny talked to another couple at the bar. Stacy was the first to break the silence. "This is at least the 3rd time I've been matched like this." Rick laughed. "They weren't even trying to be subtle, but I like it." "I hope you do too." Stacy responded with a laugh. Rick noticed how her blue eyes sparkled when she laughed. More than, in fact, much better than last time. I don't mean to sound mean, but he was too narcissistic. I couldn't get a word in edgewise while he was bragging about how wonderful he was. Well, no wonder. He was trying to impress a beautiful lady. Stacy blushed. "Ah, flattery instead of boasting. Is that your method?" As soon as she said that, Stacy blushed even more. Her cheeks practically burned as she apologized. "Sorry, Rick. That was rude of me. I'm getting a little nervous here and it didn't come out the way I intended." "Nervous? About what?" "I've been nervous ever since Jenny pointed at you on the field and said we'd go out together after the game. I watched you play and wondered if you'd be a disappointment." Rick looked at Stacy and wondered what planet this woman was from. She was the epitome of beauty. How could this woman not know how attractive she was? Why should I be disappointed? Stacy hadn't finished her first glass and was still racing her brain. She said the first thing that came to her mind. "Well, look at you. You're beautiful." Now it was Rick's turn to blush. "Ah, flattery. Does this work for you?" It was the perfect moment for Jeff and Jenny to return to their table. Jenny looked at them, wondering if this was yet another failed attempt at playing Cupid. "What's happened?" Jeff looked at Jenny with a stern gaze, preparing to tell her, "See, I told you not to interfere." But before he could say the words, Stacy interrupted him. "Thank God you're back. Rick and I were prepared to be embarrassed for the next decade." Jenny was puzzled and returned to her standard behavior when she was confused. "Come with me. I need to go to the toilet." She pulled Stacy's hand and headed to the restroom. Rick looked at Jeff. "Toilet?" Jeff just shook his head. 3 years of marriage to Jenny had taught him when to keep his mouth shut. "Do not ask." "Okay." Rick finished his first glass, noticed that Jeff's glass was almost empty, and ordered 2 more from a waitress passing by. "I like her. She's funny, beautiful, and there's something about her eyes and smile. Jenny will be glad. Her success in such matters is doubtful." "Are you going to tell me why she's still single?" "Same reason why you are alone. There are too many losers and users. It's hard to find one. It seems like you managed to find the one. I envy you and Jenny." Jeff smiled back. "I am a happy man. So do you think I got a good grade there?" Rick nodded towards the toilet door. "I'd be surprised if not. I was watching you while I was at the bar. There's chemistry between you two." Jeff looked up. "Here they come." The 2 ladies returned to the table, both smiling. If there was any doubt, Stacy dispelled it by moving her chair a little closer to Rick. They spent the next 2 hours drinking, talking, and laughing. This was the beginning. From that evening, Rick and Stacy became a couple. Stacy was a high school language arts teacher and took master's courses during the summer. Even though Rick's typical workweek was over 50 hours at his desk plus at least 1 evening at the branch, they still found time to be together every weekend and at least 2 evenings a week. Their romance developed, and like any great novel, there were obstacles to overcome. The biggest obstacle was Stacy's father, Colonel Wallace. The colonel was a tough military man who thought little of civilians, especially male civilians who did not serve. More than once, Rick considered telling the colonel why he didn't serve, but given some of the colonel's absurd statements about lazy people, he knew it wouldn't change the old man's attitude. Moreover, as far as he knew, despite her military childhood, Stacy did not seem to share her father's views on this matter, and the colonel did not interfere in their developing relationship. Neither of them were particularly experienced at sex, but they tried to please each other. It wasn't just about sex. Rick and Stacy discovered that they had a lot in common, such as their values and hopes for the future. Will they have 2 children or 3? Will they raise their children Catholic or Methodist? It didn't matter to any of them as long as the children grew up with a moral compass to guide them through the labyrinth of life. After 6 months of dating, 5 months after promising to be faithful to each other, Rick asked for Stacy's hand in marriage. Stacy said yes, and 4 months later, Rick and Stacy were married and headed to Jamaica for their honeymoon. Rick didn't tell anyone, but the sexiest moment of his life up to that point had been the morning his sweet conservative wife took off her swimsuit top while sunbathing on a public beach. There were several other women doing the same thing, which gave his wife the courage to expose those beautiful breasts so publicly. Plus, she loved watching her new husband's eyes practically pop out of their sockets, almost like something out of a Warner Brothers cartoon. A week spent in the Caribbean sun, sand, warm water, drinks, and food was the perfect start for these 2 sweet kids on their journey together. Rick couldn't believe that such a gorgeous woman, inside and out, agreed to be his life partner. One day, as they lay in the clear water, Rick marveled at how Stacy's eyes glowed the same shade of blue as the Caribbean Sea. He could see himself growing old next to her, as long as those eyes smiled at him. That night, as he watched Stacy take off the sun-kissed dress she wore to dinner, he knew he was one lucky man. Stacy had only had 2 lovers before meeting Rick, and she was one of those rare girls who made it through high school and the first 2 years of college while remaining a virgin. Both boys were clumsy. Neither of them had the skills or means to please her. That was a thing of the past now. Rick was an attentive lover. The honeymoon was over and they returned home, determined to build a life together. With the luxury of 20/20 vision, it's easy to find fault with the decisions Rick and Stacy made over the next few years. But if all the great minds at the Federal Reserve Bank, the Treasury Department, Congress, the White House, and almost every financial institution could have missed the coming wave of events that created the Great Recession, can we really expect more from the two people who put their trust in it? Great minds. The year was 2007, and like many young couples that year, as home prices continued to rise to obscene levels, Rick and Stacy panicked and bought a home when the market was at its peak. Why continue to waste money renting when they could be building equity? The house they bought, a modest 3-bedroom duplex, would probably have cost $200,000 in 2003. By the time they bought it in 2007, having won the bidding war to buy it, the closing price was $420,000. The realtor told them they were lucky to steal it with such a low bid. Right after securing their first home and mortgage, Stacy had what they both thought was a brilliant idea. Stacy will quit her job for a year, finishing her master's degree in 1 year instead of 3 summers of school. As a bonus, she would use the year to get pregnant and spend a few months with the baby before returning to work. With her master's degree, she will receive a nice salary increase and will be able to teach in a high school. They laid out everything on paper. Schedule, finances, logistics, everything came together. Rick did a fantastic job at his job. He recently received a decent base salary increase and a bonus. They could afford it. Everything went like clockwork, almost like clockwork. At the end of November, Stacy told Rick that her period was already 3 weeks late and she bought a test to confirm her pregnancy. The timing couldn't have been better. The baby was due in mid-July. Stacy could spend 2 months with the newborn before returning to teaching. Everything went according to plan. The best-laid plans so often go wrong. In April 2008, the mortgage market began to collapse and Washington Mutual began closing offices and laying off people, especially in its mortgage departments. Rick was among those fired. Rick had to be unemployed for 5 months before eventually landing a job as one of 2 assistant managers at a discount store. The salary was about half what earned at the bank. Assistant managers were required to alternate shifts every month and split their days off. On May 15, Stacy went into labor. Amy Wilson was born 7 weeks premature. It will be 3 weeks before the Wilsons can bring Amy home to the nursery that Stacy and Rick decorated for their baby. Hospital bills were piling up. Rick's Cobra insurance covered some of them, but not nearly as much as his previous employment plan would have covered. Stacy finished the semester anyway and got a teaching position at the local high school. This gave her 10 weeks at home with Amy before the school year began. Stacy's mom agreed to look after Amy while Rick worked the day shift at the store. There were 2 incomes, but it was still not enough for all the bills. They were upside down on their mortgage. Selling the house was not an option. Amy had a number of health problems, colic, ear infections, etc., which made it difficult for them all to get a good night's sleep. The weight of it all continued to weigh on Rick and Stacy. Weeks passed without any physical intimacy between them. Working from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. every other month and so many days off seriously reduced the time Rick could spend with Stacy. Best friends became roommates. The small cracks in the Wilsons' marriage began to widen during Stacy's second year of high school. This was the year that a new physical education teacher, Kyle Turner, arrived at the school. Kyle was a magnificent specimen, standing 6 feet 3 inches tall, weighing 220 pounds, and built like a linebacker. Long blonde hair and somehow always with a slight stubble on his face, just enough to give him a masculine look. Teachers, young and not so young, began whispering about the young teacher after the first day of preparation for the new school year. Since it was prep days, 2 weeks before the first day of school, most were dressed casually. Stacy wore shorts, not Daisy Dukes, but short enough to show off her long tan legs. Stacy's top was also flattering, undone just above the point where her cleavage would be visible if she bent over. She couldn't dress like this when school started, but after spending the summer getting her body back to pre-pregnancy shape, she felt like she deserved the chance to show off a little. She never expected to find someone as handsome as Kyle Turner sitting in the audience on the first day. Kyle noticed Stacy immediately. He saw legs, breasts, a pretty face, and saw the rings on her left hand. The rings didn't upset him. Stacy wouldn't be the first married woman to attract Kyle's attention. In fact, he liked them in marriage. No strings attached sex was part of his charm, almost as great as the secret knowledge of how to cuckold some poor guy. Kyle's pursuit of Stacy started on the first day, slowly at first, because he had all the time in the world. Rumors started circulating in the first week from where no one knew. Kyle was supposedly a former Ranger or Special Forces Marine, and everyone who heard the story was impressed and believed it to be true. It was the way Kyle carried himself that gave off this aura. This is a man who faced danger and came home, became a teacher, and will help young people grow up like him. Kyle didn't start rumors. He wasn't stupid. But he never denied anything, never said one way or another about how he spent 3 years in the Navy. His silence only increased the mystery and made him modest. In fact, Kyle Turner spent those 3 years working in a supply warehouse in the United States. It was the perfect job for him. Immediately after graduating from school, he learned that he hated military life. Working in a supply depot meant he never had to fire a gun or be near any action. It also allowed him to spend a couple of hours each day in the base gym. There's no shame in how Kyle spent those 3 years, if he was honest whenever asked. As if fate was working against Wilson's marriage, Stacy and Kyle had the same amount of free time every day, right before lunch break. Once Kyle determined that Stacy was eager to continue training, he suggested that she join the school gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays when the room was available. "I'll have fun working out with you instead of the sweaty Schwarzenegger I usually work out with at the gym, and maybe I can help you with your exercises." It made a lot of sense and was why Stacy spent 2 hours with Kyle every week. One day in February, Kyle surprised Stacy while they were training. "I'm writing a short novel. I finished the first draft and was wondering if you could read it and give me your thoughts." Stacy responded exactly the way Kyle wanted. She didn't treat him like an illiterate gym teacher. "I wish I could." "What is it about?" "It's a war story, but that's all I have to say. I would prefer that you read it without any preconceived notions." "I can do it. I'll get it, thank you." That evening, while Rick was at work and Amy had gone to bed, Stacy began reading Kyle's short novel about a Navy SEAL in Iraq. Stacy finished the first half before Rick got home. She could have finished it that very night, but writing notes in the margins for Kyle's second draft slowed her down. The main character's name was Tyler, and Stacy couldn't help but believe that Tyler was Kyle's nickname and wondered if the story was true. Of course, that's what Kyle had in mind when he wrote the story and asked Stacy to review it for him. Stacy thought the name Tyler was a clever portmanteau of Turner and Kyle. The next evening, Rick was working, Amy was in bed, and Stacy was reading the second half of the novel. The second half contained a chapter describing Tyler's exploits while on vacation in Italy. It was very stuffy in the passage. Stacy dropped her editing pen and her fingers were in her pajama pants before she knew it. Tyler had never had trouble finding a good woman to spend his days and nights with on previous holidays, but the 3 weeks he spent in Italy after 5 months of Taliban devastation exceeded all expectations. It all started on the first evening in Amalfi when he and Greg North were sitting in a small cafe having an after-dinner drink when 2 young ladies approached their table. "Are you 2 American?" asked the brunette. Her English was good, but she had an accent, probably French. They met. 2 women joined them. They were indeed French. Brunette Michelle seems to have her sights set on Tyler. Blonde Leslie seems to have her sights set on Greg. They drank, then found a nightclub where they danced until 3 a.m. Tyler and Greg escorted the ladies to the dock where their small yacht was moored. "Is this yours?" asked Greg. Leslie answered, "It belongs to my father. He allows us to use it for a month. Why not come back tomorrow morning and we can go on a cruise?" Tyler and Greg were disappointed that they weren't invited to spend the night but agreed to return the next morning. This would be the last time either of them would be disappointed for the next 3 weeks. In the morning, the 2 men headed to the pier, holding their breath, hoping that the yacht would still be there. It went like this. 2 women were on deck wearing matching blue bikinis and waving at them to come on board. 5 minutes after boarding, each man had a drink in his hand. The women removed their tops and the boat headed out of the harbor. Tyler couldn't help but thank the stars for what started out to be a fantastic day. Without going into detail, he watched Michelle standing on the bridge. Michelle was 5 feet 7 inches tall, had small B-cup breasts that suited her slim frame perfectly, and she was clearly in good shape. Her brown hair was pulled back into a ponytail and her blue eyes were hidden behind aviator-style sunglasses. It was a beautiful day on the Mediterranean, calm blue water, perfect sunshine. As soon as the boat was far enough from shore for privacy, both ladies went skinny dipping. Tyler and Greg undressed and joined them. Michelle swam over to Tyler and wrapped her legs around his stomach. "Let's go to the swim deck," she laughed, the word sounding sexier because of her accent. They swam to the back of the boat. Tyler sat on the back edge of the platform, his feet still in the water. He reached out to Michelle and lifted her straight out of the water. Michelle couldn't help but be impressed by Tyler's strength. This man's amazing physique was not just for show, there was strength in his muscles. Stacy thought the sex scene was a little awkward, but she'd never read erotica or romance literature, so what would she know? The lovers kissed, then laughed. Michelle leaned back until she fell off Tyler's lap into the sea. Tyler leaned forward to follow her. By the time Tyler and Michelle returned to the boat, Greg and Leslie walked out of the cabin onto the main deck, still completely naked. Leslie pulled Michelle into the cabin for a moment. When they left, Greg and Tyler were still standing there, wondering what would happen next. "Michelle and I were hoping that you would both like to spend your 3 weeks holiday with us on our boat. We'll go back to shore, you can check out and grab your things, and we'll go on a tour of the Mediterranean together. What do you say to that?" Tyler and Greg looked at each other, nodded in silent agreement, then both answered in unison, "Hell yes." Thus began the most daring vacation these two seals had ever experienced. Stacy read the next few pages, describing in intimate detail more sex between Tyler and Michelle. Now every time she read the name Michelle, she replaced it with her own and imagined Tyler spending time with her. Finally, after reading the scene where they make love on the flight bridge and then lie on their backs looking at a million stars, Stacy couldn't take it anymore. She threw the pages onto the bed and closed her eyes. Stacy imagined Kyle's arms holding her, his lips kissing her. This time she didn't stop, with her fantasy moving at the speed of thought, with the image of Kyle in the foreground. Stacy experienced incredible emotions. It took her 10 minutes for her breathing to return to normal. 2 days later, when Stacy returned his draft, Kyle could tell the story had the desired impact. Stacy blushed as she handed it to him. "Did you like it?" Kyle could barely contain the grin on his face. "Yes, it's a great story and a good first draft. I made some suggestions and comments in the margins. It's not too much, right? I didn't know if I needed to tone down the sex scenes between Tyler and Michelle." Stacy blushed even more. "Oh no, I think it added the right emphasis. Nothing wrong with having a little sex between consenting adults. It adds a spark. That's exactly what I always thought. Sex between consenting adults can add a spark to someone's life, whether in literature or in real life." Stacy caught Kyle's hint. He was as subtle as a train wreck, but it also made her happy. If there were any doubts about Kyle's intentions, this conversation cleared them up. If Stacy hadn't been married, Kyle would have made love to her that night. Stacy began to think in these terms. Why did I get married so young? Was Rick really the right man for me? Rick seemed so weak and sullen compared to Kyle. Kyle saw the danger and responded bravely to it. Rick had never done anything like that. Stacy's attitude towards Rick deteriorated until they barely spoke. Rick was tired of being humiliated, and now communication was limited to caring for Amy and scheduling. While the wall between them grew at home, the flirtation and intimacy between Stacy and Kyle grew at school. Danielle Miller was one of the teachers who watched the two lovers. Danielle was Kyle's neighbor and biology teacher, whom Kyle briefly pursued and won over until he realized he had a real shot at getting into Stacy's bed. Danielle couldn't stand Stacy with her 90-60-90 figure, pretty face, and blue eyes, and it didn't help when Kyle dropped her like an old glove to set his sights on Miss Perfect. To make matters worse, Stacy was chosen over Danielle to become the women's tennis coach this spring. Kyle's first mistake was that he played where he worked. The second mistake was that he unceremoniously dumped a jealous woman. The third mistake was that he did not know that the uncle of the dumped woman was a U.S. congressman. A week after calling Uncle Fred, Danielle received all the information she needed. As she watched the romance unfold, she knew she wouldn't have to wait long. She decided to wait until it came to sex and then ruin two lives. It had been 6 weeks since Stacy had read his story, 6 weeks of flirting. Kyle was tired of this. It was time to act. "Stacy, you've been teasing me long enough. I'll make a reservation for us for dinner Thursday night. I know it's your book club night. I read your planner. We'll go to Carmen's for dinner and then go across the street to the Hilton. I will give you love like no one else could." Stacy didn't object to Kyle's demands. All she could think about was how courageous and determined her future lover could be. How different that is from Rick. Rick always asked. Kyle spoke. She had one question. "Why at the hotel? Why not at your home?" "Because there are 3 other teachers living in my complex. I'm guessing you don't want to be seen coming and going from my apartment." "Not yet anyway. While you're married to that loser." Stacy couldn't help but smile at Kyle's politeness towards her situation. It didn't occur to her that she should protect her husband after Kyle called Rick a loser. And Kyle couldn't help but smile inside. He once again managed to tell some stupid woman that they had a future without saying it directly. A future he had no intention of making permanent. He would enjoy a few months of sex with this lady before moving on to his next conquest. Stacy was already late for practice and the girls were waiting. So she made a decision. It's a date. Rick and Stacy were in the kitchen Thursday morning drinking coffee. Amy ate her cereal as usual, throwing it around. "Rick, remember I have a book club after tennis practice tonight. You'll have to pick Amy up from mommy before 6 and feed her. I'll be home by 10. I can handle it." "What book are you discussing tonight?" This question got Stacy thinking. Was this a trick question? Stacy took a sip of her coffee to buy time before answering, but there was still an edge to her tone. "Water for elephants." "Why do you ask? You're not usually interested in my book club." Rick was a little taken aback by Stacy's tone, but realized that it was only emblematic of how she had been treating him lately. "I didn't mean anything bad. I was just trying to be polite." Rick grabbed his lunch from the counter, kissed Amy on the head, and made his way out of the house before he lost control. Rick's quick departure did not go unnoticed by Stacy. At first, she was angry at Rick for leaving without saying goodbye. Then she realized that she probably hadn't said anything nice to Rick in weeks. Before the first period, Kyle looked into Stacy's class. He looked around the room to make sure no one could hear him. "We have a table at Carmen for 6 and a room across the street at the Hilton. Don't be late for dinner. I know you need to get home tonight, and I'll need every minute with you to make up for the months I've waited to stay with you. Alone with you. I need to be home by 10 o'clock. Should we skip dinner?" Stacy laughed quietly. The door was still open. "Nice try, mate, but I'm looking forward to a nice dinner and a couple of glasses of wine and no kids." "And after?" "That too. Now get out of here." Stacy didn't know how she managed to stay calm all day and during tennis practice. She dismissed the team a few minutes early at 10 minutes before 5. Everything went according to plan. After tennis practice, Stacy waited until all the girls had finished in the locker room before changing out of her sweatpants and into the little black dress she had last worn when Rick took her to the Crystal Room for New Year's. When was this? Almost 3 years ago? When they had money for such things. This was the last time she wore 4-inch heels with over-the-knee stockings. Stacy took one last look at herself in the full-length mirror. She knew Kyle Turner would like what he saw tonight, and even more so when the dress came off. Stacy looked at her reflection and tried to convince herself, "I deserve it." The clothes she wore to school that day were in a small suitcase. She planned to shower and change at the hotel before returning home. Her hair was pulled back into a stylish ponytail, eliminating the need to wash and dry it afterwards. Stacy left the building, locking the doors behind her, and was walking to her car when a blue Honda pulled up. Angel Martinez, one of the seniors and a member of the tennis team, almost jumped out of the Honda. "Mrs. Wilson, thank God I caught you before you left. I left my textbook and ethics notes in my locker and I have a test tomorrow. Can you open it for me so I can get them? Please." Stacy felt embarrassed that one of her students had caught her like this. She told Angel to follow her and went back to the locker room while Angel chatted the whole time. "Mrs. Wilson, you look so elegant tonight, on a weekday. Are you and Mr. Wilson celebrating something tonight, like an anniversary or something?" Before Stacy could respond, Angel continued to ramble. "I was always so embarrassed when my mom and dad would go out like that. Mom would wear something kind of sexy and dad would wear a nice jacket. They would come home and it was like, get a room because they would hug and kiss. And I was at that age where you hate the thought of your parents doing this, right?" Angel was getting louder as Stacy stood at the door and Angel was at her locker. Angel returned with a book and notebook in her hands, continuing to talk. "Then, when I was old enough to realize it, I was pretty proud of them. Here they are after almost 20 years together and 3 kids and they're still in love. How cool is that?" Now they were in their cars and Angel looked straight into Stacy's eyes. "Have fun tonight, Mrs. Wilson. I saw your husband. He's handsome. No wonder you're doing so well." And she left. Stacy stood outside her car with the door open and sobbed, talking uncontrollably to herself. "What a stupid and selfish fool I am. Do I deserve this?" That's what I told myself. What I deserve is to lose my family for what I was about to do. When did I become so selfish and self-righteous? No one answered Stacy's questions. It took her about 10 minutes for her tears to clear up so she could start making her way home. She was so upset that she didn't even think about how she was dressed. All she wanted was to hug her husband and child. Rick spent the day depressed. How did his life become such a burden? Where was the joy? The bills kept piling up. The little joys that once made life worth fighting for have all but disappeared, especially the love he and Stacy once shared. He had been able to deal with it for most of the last 2 years. He owed it to his little girl to be strong. But for at least the last 6 months, Stacy couldn't look him in the eyes or give him the love he needed. Rick left work earlier than usual. Screw this, he thought. He thought about stopping at the pub for a pint before heading to his mother-in-law's to pick up Amy. Instead, he decided to go home and enjoy a few hours of peace and quiet. This turned out to be a big mistake. Rick took the mail from a box by the road and made the mistake of opening 2 envelopes with overdue written on the outside of each. How humiliating. Rick walked inside, read both notices, and wondered where he was going to get another $1,500 by the end of the month. Rick walked past the refrigerator with its 2 cans of cheap lager and reached over to the top cabinet above the stove where they kept a bottle of bourbon in case the Colonel visited. An overwhelming feeling of despair and depression passed through him after he took his first sip of alcohol. He took a second drink. Rick has been thinking a lot over the past 3 months. He knew why, he knew how. The only decision left until this evening was when. Why? Well, the main reason is that Rick was more valuable dead than alive. The Wilson family's desperate financial situation could be improved by an influx of capital from the life insurance payout. Another reason is that life was no longer worth living. Rick is tired of playing Sisyphus, rolling a stone up a hill, only to have it roll back down again. It was bearable when he did it as a team, with Stacy at his side, easing the load with her smiles and love. But for at least the last 6 months, he had been pushing this stone up the mountain all alone. How? This took a lot more thought. It didn't have to look like suicide. For 2 reasons. It would be painful for Amy if she grew up and ever found out that her father committed suicide. The second reason was financial. Rick's $250,000 life insurance would have paid out twice as much if the death had been an accident. The perfect solution, like many perfect solutions, was right in front of him. Every day, on his way to and from the city, Rick passed by death row. Suicide Curve got its name after the second of two cars fell off a cliff into a gorge. It was a dangerous part of the old road between the city center and the area where the Wilsons lived. Years ago, the city created an alternative route into downtown. After it was determined the highway department could not correct the curve and make it safe. The city even considered closing the road, but too many residents objected to the closure because the alternative route took 12 minutes longer. The city kept it open, installed cheap fencing, and reduced the speed around the curve to 15 mph. So the only thing left to decide was when, which was decided when Rick took his second sip of bourbon. There's no time like the present. He could have said it out loud, but there was no one in the kitchen to hear him, so perhaps it was only in his own mind. Rick took the keys to his pickup truck. The car would easily break through the flimsy barriers on the curve. Rick stopped when he opened the door. Hell, would 2 shots of bourbon affect his blood alcohol level enough to make him legally drunk? Will this affect my insurance payment? Rick decided it wasn't worth the risk. He returned to the house, vomited in the toilet, rinsed his mouth, and washed the glass before putting it back. 10 minutes later, Rick sat in the truck, engine idling, staring at the curve, trying to work up the courage to take the plunge. Stacy decided to take a shortcut home to save a few precious minutes, even though she rarely used the old road. Today was an exception. She slowed down to go around a curve when she saw Rick's truck on the other side. Why is he here? It was in the opposite direction from her mom's house. The truck was just starting to move when Stacy pressed the horn. Rick didn't notice the approaching car when he finally decided to act. His foot moved from the brake to the gas, his left foot released the clutch, and he was on his way. Suddenly, his subconscious registered the sound, and his eyes focused on the approaching car. Suddenly, Rick braked suddenly. What the hell is Stacy's car doing here? He looked out the open driver's side window to see Stacy in her car pulled up next to him. Rick, what are you doing here? Rick shook his head. He was so determined to do the deed that he seemed as if under anesthesia. He just looked at his wife, trying to understand what she was saying. Rick, where is Amy? A terrible thought popped into Stacy's mind, and she ran out of her car and ran over to Rick's truck, looking into the cab. Rick still didn't say a word, just looked at his wife in that beautiful dress. Richard, let's go home. We need to talk. Stacy returned to her car and waited for him to turn his truck around before following him home. As soon as she entered the house, she went into the bedroom to change clothes, and then 5 minutes later appeared in the kitchen, where Rick was sitting at the table. She quickly called her mother. Mom, can you leave Amy for the evening, please? After which she sat down. Before she could say anything, Rick spoke. You looked good tonight. I haven't seen that dress since you were pregnant with Amy. I'm guessing you weren't going to book club. Did you have a date? It was time without deception. Yes, it was. I'm sorry. Stacy started crying. Her tears did not touch him. Rick was more disappointed and upset than he had ever been in his life. Are you going to leave? Stacy realized how serious it was. Oh, God, no. I want to stay. Please, I know I messed up. I know it was terrible here, and most of it is my fault. I want you to know that I want to repair our marriage and that I've never physically cheated on you. But you were emotionally unfaithful, weren't you? Yes, I'm sorry, and I'm ashamed of myself. Tell me about it and tell me who he is. After you tell me, I'll decide if we have a chance. Stacy told Rick everything that led up to that evening, including what made her change her mind. No embellishments, no deception. Rick listened without interruption. When Stacy finished with another apology, she couldn't wait any longer. That's it, Rick. Now you know everything. Now it's your turn. Tell me why you were on the curve. Rick told Stacy how he wanted to die and planned to finish everything that evening. Before he finished, Stacy was sitting on his lap, holding his head, crying on his chest. She looked into his eyes and begged. Please, Rick, I love you. Let's recommit ourselves to each other and try to get back to being friends and lovers. I don't want to live without you. Rick was glad to hear that Stacy wanted to save the marriage, but he needed to ask. How do we do this? First, we will swallow our pride and ask for help. There's not much pride in trying to commit suicide and, forgive me, there's no pride in planning to meet your lover in some hotel. So pride shouldn't be an issue. Who do we ask for help? Rick's comment about the hotel room stung, but Stacy knew she deserved it. We'll ask Mom. The last time she offered us money, we were too proud and refused. She has money that she inherited after my grandfather died. It's in certificates of deposit and she offered to lend us as much as we need. Need if we pay her the same interest she gets from the bank, 3%, and we won't have to pay her back the principal until we get back on our feet. We'll use most of the money to pay off everything except the mortgage and some to see a marriage counselor. We need help, Rick. We can't do this on our own. Rick didn't agree to it that night. Stacy and Rick spent the next week discussing the pros and cons. They finally agreed after deciding that an experienced third party would be necessary to overcome the trust issues they each had. How could Rick trust Stacy again after she committed emotional cheating and came so close to physical cheating? The thought of Stacy having sex with another man or even kissing him made him sick. How could Stacy trust Rick again, the man who came so close to committing suicide? Could she trust him with her life or the life of their daughter? Stacy had a hard time getting over her fear of what Rick might do. Before all this, other events happened. Stacy returned to school on Friday morning and everything exploded during the third period, Stacy's free period. Kyle walked into Stacy's class angrier than a wasp. He didn't see the two students working on the information board at the back of the room. Where the hell were you last night? Not only did I have a nightmare from you at dinner sitting there alone like some idiot, I paid for the damn hotel room where I was waiting for you just in case you were late. The two young girls ran out of the room and if Kyle had any sense he would have left, but he was on the rise and continued to scold and threaten until the deputy director entered the classroom. She had to scream to get Kyle's attention. Miss Wilson, Mr. Turner, come to my office immediately. Rumors of the clash spread quickly, although the full facts were distorted. Danielle Miller figured this was the perfect time to drop her information bomb from Uncle Fred. Anonymously, Danielle spread the information that Kyle Turner served, but was a clerk in the internal service and was never a special forces hero. Everyone felt that Kyle was lying and stealing honor, even if it was a lie by omission. Any sympathy Kyle had hoped for quickly disappeared. His speech to the students and the threats heard by the vice principal became his downfall. With no right to work protected, Kyle was fired that same day. Stacy did better. She was told to be careful, but since she had not broken any school rules, she could be left with a warning to avoid any future misunderstandings. Stacy's mom gave them money. They used it to pay off their debts and began seeing a marriage counselor who helped them find partnership and love again. The big moment in their recovery came a few months later. Stacy, Rick, and Amy visited Stacy's mom and dad. Stacy and the colonel were in the office when everyone in the kitchen heard Stacy's voice rise. Dad, it's not Rick's fault that the economy tanked and Amy was born premature. He supported my decision to quit my job and go back to school. He works over 50 hours a week at a job he hates to help us stay afloat. He has done nothing but be a faithful husband and a wonderful father, and if you can't respect such a man, then I feel sorry for you. If I hear one more disparaging comment about my husband from your mouth, you will never see me or yours again, granddaughter. Stacy ran into the kitchen, took Amy from her mom's arms, and told Rick they were leaving. I can't listen to his insults anymore. I'm sorry, Mom. She hurried to the car, put Amy in the child's seat, and drove away. Rick kissed his mother-in-law on the cheek and followed Stacy with a big smile on his face. This was the first time Stacy had come to Rick's defense so openly to her father. It's hard to explain how this incident changed Rick's self-esteem. His renewed faith in his marriage and himself gave him the confidence to start looking for a better job with Stacy's support. 3 months after that day at Stacy's parents', Rick was hired to work at an expanding credit union as head of corporate sales. The economy had already started to pick up, and with a combination of salary and bonuses, Rick was earning slightly more than before he was fired. 2 years have passed since that fateful evening in Kravaya. While a strict budget allowed the Wilsons to pay off more than half of their debt to Mom Stacy, a year with a counselor gave them the tools to rebuild trust and love for each other. Stacy no longer worried when Rick left the house with Amy, and Rick didn't worry on the evenings when Stacy went to book club. One evening, Rick returned home to find his favorite dish cooking on the stove and Amy not at home. Amy was with her grandparents. The Colonel had long ago learned to keep his mouth shut at the insistence of his wife. "If you think I'm going to let you take my granddaughter away from me, you're sadly mistaken." Stacy asked Rick to sit down. "Rick, I've thought it all through and planned it all out. I want a second honeymoon and a second child." Rick was taken aback by both of Stacy's statements. "Can we afford it?" Stacy was glad Rick didn't say no right away. "I researched packages and found a 6-day trip to Jamaica for under $2,000, all inclusive." "What about Amy?" "Mom agreed to look after Amy." Rick smiled, thinking to himself how great it would be to spend 6 days with his wife. The last time they had the opportunity to spend more than one night together was 4 years ago before Amy was born. "Well, book it if you haven't already." "What about the second child?" "We always said we wanted at least 2. I was scared after Amy's health problems, but I talked to my doctor and she said the chance of a second baby being premature is less than 1 in 20, which is what most women have. Whose first child was born premature, second pregnancy goes full term. Plus, my school insurance is much better than what we had before. Even if there are complications, most of the expenses will be covered this time. Can I say yes to a holiday now and think about having a second child a little later?" Stacy agreed, and that's how they ended up on the same beach in Jamaica 4 weeks later. On the plane to Jamaica, Rick surprised Stacy. "Leave the diaphragm at home this week, honey. Maybe we'll get lucky here and give Amy a little brother or sister." Stacy couldn't say a word as she hugged and kissed Rick. "Thank you." If Rick was wondering if this vacation could top their honeymoon, he needn't have worried. Within 5 minutes of them settling into their lounge chairs, Stacy had taken off her top. For dinner that night, Stacy wore the sexiest sundress imaginable. On the third morning, Stacy woke Rick just after sunrise and dragged him to a section of the beach they had never been to before. Stacy completely shocked Rick when she took off her bikini top and bottom before jumping into the warm water. Rick snapped out of his stupor, threw off his swim trunks and joined Stacy. Both of them were floating on the water. Rick asked, "How do you know about this place?" "The woman I talked to last night, Janice, told me about it. She and her husband come here almost every morning." "Is it legal?" "Janice said that if you're dressed by 9 in the morning when the locals come, no one will mind. She said you need to watch your swimsuits on the beach. One couple had some kids walk by and steal their swimsuits." Rick didn't like the idea, imagining how they would return to the resort if they only had their original costumes. "Let's swim closer to the shore just in case." Stacy laughed before turning around and starting to swim back to shore on her back. Rick stayed behind for a minute, admiring the view. When Rick caught up with Stacy, he asked, "Are we running into your friend and her husband?" "If we don't leave here before 8, that's why I woke you up so early." They spent the next half hour skinny dipping, kissing, and cuddling. They didn't want to take any chances, so they got dressed and ran back to the resort. Back in the room, they undressed, took a shower, dried themselves off, and returned to bed. Their second child, a boy they named Richard Jr., may have been conceived that morning. 8 months after returning from Jamaica, Stacy was sitting in her classroom preparing for her first lesson when she received an unexpected visit. She looked up from her notes and saw Angel Martinez standing in the doorway. "Mrs. Wilson, may I come in?" "Of course, Angel, what are you doing here?" "I'll be here in Lincoln for the next 12 weeks as a trainee teacher. I'll be teaching chemistry in Mr. Bauer's class." Stacy stood up and awkwardly hugged her former student, awkwardly because of her baby belly. "That's great. Mr. Bowers is a fantastic teacher. You'll learn a lot from him. And if you need anything, I'll be here for a couple more weeks, hopefully. Sorry to say, Mrs. Wilson, but you look like you're ready to give birth at any moment. I'm so happy for you and Mr. Wilson." "Yes, we are blessed." When Stacy said that, she was actually thinking about how blessed Angel was to forget her ethics book all those years ago. School was about to start. The two women hugged and Angel laughed. "Thank you, Angel," Stacy whispered quietly, not loud enough for Angel to hear. Years later, on the eve of Amy's wedding, Stacy sat down with her daughter and told her how close she had come to cheating. She explained how she became frustrated with their financial problems and why she felt entitled until the moment when she was 1 hour away from making the biggest mistake of her life, a mistake that would destroy their family. She told Amy about how hard they had worked to rebuild their trust in marriage, how happy she was that Rick forgave her and gave the marriage a second chance. Both women ended up hugging and crying. The next morning, a few hours before the wedding, Amy approached her father. "Dad, Mom told me about what happened all those years ago. I think she doesn't want me to make the same mistakes. What she couldn't tell me was why you didn't leave her." Rick wasn't surprised that Stacy shared her story with Amy. Although Rick forgave her long ago, Stacy never fully forgave herself. It was her style to use her mistake to try to warn Amy against life's temptations, even if it meant exposing herself. "Well, it would have been a lot harder if your mom had actually gone to that hotel, but she didn't. And your mom not only apologized for how close she came to cheating, but for everything leading up to that night. I've spent most of my time wondering what my life would be like without you and your mom. I'm sure I'd be lonely and sad. Instead, I spent the last 20 years happier than any person has any right to be, considering how close I came to destroying everything." "What do you mean?" "Today is not the best day to discuss all the mistakes your father has made or almost made in his life. Let's have a wonderful wedding today, and I promise that someday we will have a drink together, and I will tell you why your mother, the best wife in the world." Amy didn't like it, but she agreed, and she quietly made a promise to herself, to soon buy Dad this drink and listen to his story. Rick wondered if he would tell Amy the whole story, the one that no one else in the world knew. How, a few days after Stacy's confession, he broke down the door of Kyle Turner's apartment, ready to beat up the scoundrel, only to discover that Turner had already left town. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.